All right, welcome to our science chats. Today I have Nicole Bolduc and Tori Schilling, both teachers from Connecticut actually, and we have been following each other on Twitter for quite a while as we both learn, or all three of us have been learning how to use NGSS in the classroom, and we thought this was a really good opportunity to touch base with them because we're all trying to learn how not only to do NGSS in the classroom, but now also using that in a distance or remote setting. So Nicole, Tori, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Can you tell us a little bit about your teaching experience, who you are, and where you teach?
Sure, I'm Nicole Bolduc, and I teach at Ellington Middle School, and I've been teaching this is my 17th year, and I teach 7th grade science.
And I am Tori Schilling. I also teach at Ellington Middle School, and this is my 3rd year teaching 8th grade science.
Awesome. Can you tell me just a little bit about your school system and
Sure, we teach in a suburban town, and we have about a little over 100 students each.
7-8 school.
Oh yeah, 7-8 school. Thanks.
7-8 building.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And so how has teaching been going? You guys obviously closed down like everybody else, or a lot of other places here in Michigan as well. So how's it going? What are some of the things that you guys have experienced as you've transitioned to teaching from home?
So when we had to leave school, I know for me, we were in the middle of the open science sound unit. So I had to take those investigations and convert them into a distance learning platform. But I will say that having the open science resources made that easier for me to make that transition. At first it was a rough transition for me because the discussions obviously weren't happening as much anymore or at all, which are a huge part of open science. The investigations, but I was able to use videos and things like that to convert into a distance learning platform. And now things are running much more smoothly, and I'm learning how to use technologies to make the education work for me and work for the students and giving constant feedback. So at first it was a learning curve, but I feel like I'm in the groove now. Nothing's the same as it is in the classroom. I mean, I really miss our discussion circles the most, I would say. But again, as we get into it later, using Jamboard is helping us get around that a little bit.
Tori, how about you?
We're doing asynchronous learning for the most part. So Nicole and I both post a video every day of ourselves or something else that's helpful for students, along with some kind of assignment to go along with it. Again, trying to keep those routines, like those science routines, as consistent as possible. I think we both offered live lessons, but they're optional for students. We started distance learning in the middle or towards the beginning of a project. So that was kind of helpful just because students had an idea of what we were already going to do, and it was an independent project. But then after that, we started working on a natural selection unit, which again had to be adapted just to fit the needs of students because we're trying to keep our lessons to like a 20-25 minute mark, just not to overwhelm students at home. So we've been adapting things, but trying to keep it also as consistent as possible using new resources like Jamboard, Google Forms, Google Slides, Google Drawings to model and try to do as best as we can at home. So we definitely were fortunate because our school has been one-to-one, so students do know how to use technology. We had Google Classroom already set up, so we were able to hit the ground running. So if anybody's watching and feeling like overwhelmed, we were a little bit more fortunate to be ahead of the game there, but we're just trying new things and all trying to do our best. So it's been
good. And I think that's an important point, right? Because schools are in different places in terms of technology access and opportunity to connect. But I think one of the things that's really jumped out at me around the school closure is this idea of equity, right? And so if we are going to be faced with these kinds of things, like we really have to close that digital divide because then teachers like you guys can hit the ground running, like you said, and really, keep engaging kids in important practices. So, having said that, you guys mentioned a couple of digital tools, and I know you guys have some slides to share with us with some examples. So, can you tell us a little bit about those tools that you've been using?
Sure. So Jamboard has been awesome. Seeing it all over Twitter. I first saw it from Gretchen on Twitter. And I can provide her handle because she was really awesome. She even met with me to teach me how to use it. But it's this Google application. So if you go to your Google Apps, you can look for Jamboard. And if you don't see it, you might have to talk to your administration. I know ours had to open it up for us, but it's free to use. And it's like in the Google Apps, which is really awesome because it just kind of syncs into your Google Drive. So once you find Jamboard, there's an orange plus in the bottom right hand corner, and you can add a board, and we'll kind of walk you through how we've been using that just to keep those routines consistent. I was super lucky to connect with people on Twitter because I saw Jamboard all over Twitter. Someone who's been using it is Gretchen. She was super kind and actually met with me and taught me how to use it. So at the top, you can add boards, you can add multiple boards, you can write, erase, add sticky notes, add an image. So it's kind of like a digital whiteboard. My favorite feature is adding sticky notes because it's super easy for students to do and move around. You can color code them and organize them. So that's been nice because we use a lot of sticky notes in our classrooms. So it's familiar to students and it kind of makes them feel like we're really in science class. How can I use Jamboard in my classroom? So this is just how we've been using it. So step one before using Jamboard, we used it a lot for gallery walks. So we had students create initial models. I created a Google Drawing template for students to manipulate. So I preloaded some pictures for them to use, but I also encouraged them to get creative and add images if they wanted to. But I figured kind of giving them to students might be helpful just because we've never really modeled in Google Drawings before, so they could kind of drag and drop their pictures. And I think in the next slide, I show examples of how students kind of took this, or Nicole can share about what she's used, but students kind of took this and ran with it and made it their own, which was kind of cool.
Tori,
Yeah,
how do you share that through the Google Classroom?
Yeah, so you
Okay,
can make a Google Drawing, preload images, and then set it to make a copy for every student. And then I
gotcha.
can go in and check all their work, which is super easy.
And I did the same thing. I had actually sent all this to Tori before I posted it for my kids and said, can you check this for me? What do you think? So she helped me come up with a lot of this. We're doing the chicken storyline right now through Next Gen Storylines. And I took the initial model that I always have the kids do on paper, and I converted it into a Google Drawing. And this is what I came up with for my students. And I posted it on Google Classroom, also made a copy for every student. I really liked that Tori had the questions on the bottom, because in the classroom, we're always encouraging kids to pre-think through questions that we're going to post on our driving question board. And this was a good kind of first step of having them record those questions. So the kids were able to do their models and then record initial questions at the bottom. And I did give kids an option of using paper and pencil and posting their picture into Google Classroom if they felt more comfortable doing that, or doing it digitally like this on Google Drawing. So they did have that. We tried to offer as much choice as possible because kids have preferences. And I did have kids take pictures and send them to me. So like Tori said, this was sort of the first step before we put them into Jamboard.
That's a nice option too. I know you guys are one-to-one, but in some other places where kids may not always have access to a full laptop or computer, they can do that, send you a picture using their phone or something. So it's a nice option.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are some examples of student models. So they kind of took it and ran with it. One student inserted an image of a globe just to show how this was about natural selection. So how the foxes might have moved around the globe, and started thinking about how they might have adapted to fit their environments. And then we worked on that idea of adaptation. But these were just some of their initial ideas, for example, student models.
And then these are a couple examples of my students' initial models. So you can see some kids did it more in a text version on the right, because it's hard to draw on Google Drawings. It's a little bit clunky. And then on the left, you have a student that really took that time to try to draw out what they thought the chick looked like at different stages. And then at the bottom, you can see some of their initial sticky note questions And like Tori said, in Google Classroom, you can write little private comments to the kids, which is really nice because you can, just like you would in the classroom, give them some feedback. With some kids, I said, can you say more about what's going on around the egg? Can you say more about what's going on in the egg? So that just gave them some points to work more on if they needed to.
Yeah. Hey, Nicole, can I interrupt one second here too? One of the things that we're dealing with, I think, as we go back is going to be this narrowing of the curriculum to focus on literacy and math. And what I'm looking at right now with this student model is how much literacy is built into this particular lesson, right? Like the text features, vocabulary and words that students are using in this model is just really impressive.
Yeah, and they're doing captions. Like when you think about it and I look at it that way, you're absolutely right. When we talk further past Jamboard a little bit with investigations, so many opportunities to read articles at home that's like pushed me to give them more to read. So I think that you're right. I think that this lends itself to more literacy skills. And now we're ready to do the gallery walk because we've got our initial models like we would in the classroom.
So just some features from the teacher lens, I kind of tried to find 10 to 12 models that represented the class as a whole and kind of represented all those ideas. So then you can add boards at the top of Jamboard, and as a teacher, you can screenshot those models and then import them as images onto the Jamboard. Just to kind of set that up from a teacher lens, and then you can push it out to students, and we'll like walk through how to do that, but they can add sticky notes to give each other feedback and see each other's work, which I think is what I was at least missing the most. And I know students gave feedback that it's very independent when it comes to distance learning, so it's hard to kind of connect with your peers and see what their thoughts are. And we do a lot of that in the classroom, just honestly, even if it's like peeking over your shoulder to see what your partner wrote, or doing a gallery walk, or just informally sharing out. I feel like that's something that gets lost a little bit in distance learning. So I was excited to see this resource that allowed those routines to continue. This is something I just showed students before they started giving feedback, some sentence stems, which Nicole then actually preloaded into her Jamboard, which I thought was a really good idea. But just what do you mean by that? I like how you, I wonder. So some of those sentence stems to get students started. I also just reminded them about feedback to avoid, because I get a lot of like pretty colors or you spelled this wrong. So just kind of that mini lesson on what is like helpful feedback is good.
And it's funny because now that this worked pretty well virtually, I'm thinking I need to do this more in the classroom. And even though I've done sentence starters, I need to push them more, because we do still get that looks pretty or nice drawing. And I think that this is helping me get better at getting the kids to say things that are meaningful.
Yeah. So this is an example board that I actually did with students during a live lesson. I screenshotted this one so students' names weren't on them, because when I had them add sticky notes, they added their names. But this one we just did together during like a live lesson option. So this is what it kind of started looking like. Just adding some ideas with sticky notes. We kind of tried to color code some of them for like related phenomena or just some other ideas. So that's just what it ended up looking like.
And this is an example of my gallery walk. I picked 6 models. I'm working collaboratively with a teaching partner, my coworker. So she did 3 of her students, I did 3 of mine. I did 6 only because I do have 7th graders, so I scaled it back a little bit. Tori has 8, so her kids can probably handle looking at more models, but I was afraid that by like the 7th or 8th one, they would kind of lose interest a little bit. But they actually did scroll all the way to the 6th one, and I had feedback all the way from 1 to 6, so I was really impressed with that. But like Tori had mentioned, I preloaded in the top left corner, it makes like an upside down L. I preloaded those sticky notes of sentence starters, and I did notice that kids were using them. You can see that most of their sentences start with, I wonder why, your idea is similar, what do you mean by, I think I only have like 1 sticky note that said, I like your picture, but other than that, there were some really, which you're gonna get in the classroom too, but there were some really, really insightful, again, almost better than what I see in the classroom work, because I think we were really pushing these sentence starters. And they were clearly reading each other's models, and you can tell by reading these sticky notes. And I also did have them put their names. I did erase their last names for this, but you can see that That way there's a little bit of accountability, and also I think pride in what they're saying to each other. So very impressed with the things that they were saying.
Yeah, that's really impressive because too one of the other issues that I think we've come up with or that we've noticed is teachers struggling with feedback, right? Like how do I different ways to give feedback, and you've set up a system where the kids are a really integral part of that, like giving each other feedback. So that's a really cool example.
So these are just some like reminders. You screenshot students' work, insert to Jamboard, and then have students give sticky note feedback. Other things that were helpful is I made a copy, 5 copies, because I have 5 classes, and I assigned them to my classes. That way 108 students weren't all working on the same Jamboard. I said add 1 to 3 sticky notes just so it didn't get overwhelming. So, and it was our first time using it. I think if I used it again, I could probably do more. And I'm really lucky that Nicole is using this, because if we, no one knows what's going to happen next year, but her students now already know how to use it. So we can continue to kind of build on those routines, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I copied Tori's structure, so I also made 5 copies. I also made a copy, an extra one, because the kids could accidentally delete things, so I just wanted to be cautious about that. But they were so respectful in there, which I was really impressed with. I didn't see anything inappropriate, and kids didn't touch other people's things, and it was really impressive on how the digital citizenship that they took. I was really happy with that too. And this was something that Tori, the next steps are great, because it's very hard when you have over 100 kids to make sure that every kid submitted a sticky note. So in case you missed a few kids doing that, Tori came up with a really good way of making sure that at least everybody was engaged in some way in the assignment, even if they didn't add a sticky. So Tori will start talking about that. We'll show you how we did
And I
that.
have to shout out people on Twitter, because like I feel like we all just take ideas and run with them. And like Gretchen, again, I think we kind of met together and came up with this idea, or she mentioned it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's great. But how to take attendance, because our district encourages us to just make sure the kids at least check in that day. So again, in case they didn't put their name on a sticky note, or it's really difficult for me to check them all, I just made this Google form, which who knew you can put so much in a Google form. But I had them like watch a video of me explaining stuff, and then they found their Jamboard. And then after that, the models that I had put in the Jamboard, I also put them in the Google form, so they went together. And then I just had them click which models they commented on today, so that I could just get a quick check-in. I asked them what were some things they saw similar between the models, what were some differences they saw between the models, and what seemed to be the key ideas in our explanatory models to help us build our consensus model, which unfortunately I had to do by myself. But I asked them the next day, did I do a good job of capturing all our ideas and all our questions? And then I just asked them on a scale of 1 to 5, how did you enjoy Jamboard? And a lot of them gave really positive feedback. They said like it felt like science class. They were really excited about it, to see each other's work. They said like they got ideas that they had never even thought of from their peers, which again happens in the classroom so much. So I liked that they got to do it on their own, but then actually see what some of their peers were doing as well.
I did the same thing. I just put chicken pictures in there instead. One thing too that I was able to do is I had asked them in the previous form the day before what key ideas they thought were important. So I was able to pre-list them and have it be a checkbox. I wish I'd taken a picture of it for this, but they actually, I think one question was, what key ideas did you see or what were in your model, and what key ideas do you wish you had added to your model? Would you like to add to your model? And they just checked those things off, so I could tally up the percentage of kids that thought that like heat was important, or time was important, those different key factors. But I basically did exactly what Tori did here, which worked really well.
And for what Nicole did, it was super cool, because on the back end of Google Forms, it creates like data, like
A bar graph.
Yes, bar
Right?
graph. I'm like, why did I forget that word? It creates a bar graph that you could show with kids, saying like, oh, and then they could analyze and interpret that data to make conclusions about what they found important on their models, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, and I can always add a slide in for that to show you what that looks like. But you know how Google Forms spits out data for the responses, like how many kids said this, how many kids said that. I was showing the kids, wow, a lot of you said this, and a lot of you said that. So that was really cool to see that.
I never thought of that, but you're right. We've used that as adults, and in our
Right.
analysis, but engaging students in that and analyzing and interpreting data piece, yet another practice that we can
I know.
move
Math practice.
online. Very cool.
Exactly. So again, at the end of all these slides, I just tried to capture like the overall details. So you just insert students' work into the Google form, have students reflect on their gallery walk, just so you can easily get that attendance piece if needed. And then Nicole even took it a step further, going with related. We did a little bit of related phenomena, and we did create a driving question board, but Nicole did like a phenomenal job with this. So.
I love doing this with the chickens because they come up with such great related phenomena. So this was my Google form for that day to elicit the ideas or collect ideas of related phenomena. I did like a modified QFT as best I could. And then I also did investigation ideas. So these were the questions that I asked the kids in the form. So the first question was number and list at least 2 related phenomena. And with Tori's help, I gave them some sentence starters for this, because in the classroom, I can talk through the directions like, oh, this reminds me of, or something else that does this is. So I gave them a little bit more direction than that, but they easily came up with 2 related phenomena. And I really feel that having practiced these skills in the classroom first were helpful. But even if next year I have to start with this, I can just be really explicit with my directions. The second question was that I wanted them to come up with 2 questions that specifically related to like the chick hatching part of the initial model. So I wanted them to really zero in on what were they wondering about to make the chick hatch. And then the third question was, okay, now come up with 2 questions about the bottom row. Why isn't the chick hatching around that scenario? And I also reminded them that they've already asked questions several times in their other assignments, so they could go back if they wanted to. My next step for them was ask 1 question about a related phenomena that's related to the chicks, but isn't about the chicks. And we've done this in the classroom too many times. And then the 5th question was, what's a question that relates back to something we've already done? And they did a great job. They were asking about chicks and sound and chicks and thermal energy. It was amazing to see the quality of work that I see in the classroom on this form. And then their last 2 questions was for them to prioritize in step 6, which is part of the QFT process. So they had to prioritize which 2 questions are they most curious about. And then the last question was, what are some investigation ideas? So I almost had to take the QFT process and squeeze it into just a few questions, but I also didn't want to overwhelm them. So I was being very mindful about how to get questions out of them that are quality, but that aren't going to be too much for them and overwhelm them without me being able to help them like I would in the classroom.
Yeah, and again, I know the broken record time here, but like this engaging in this practice, asking questions, leads to so much literacy. Like I can just see how those beginning with those topics in a QFT process, whether you're face to face or online, is really driving kids to use multiple literacy practices with science as their context. So I think that's amazing work.
It was cool, and the engagement was really high. I mean, nobody left anything blank. Like they really did ask. Even kids that typically struggle to ask questions were able to do it with this assignment. So I was really impressed.
Yeah.
From this form, Jamboard doesn't yet import from Google Forms. That would be a great next step.
Oh.
Shout out to Google to work on that. But what I did is I did take the time to copy and paste. I kept up with it throughout the day so that I wasn't overwhelmed, but I copied and pasted the related phenomena from kids that they put on that form, and this is what we came up with. And a lot of responses were similar, so I consolidated. But you can see that there's just a huge variety in here of what the chicks reminded them of, and I was so impressed with their responses. And it's really exciting to know that maybe we can learn some of these things even in the couple of weeks that we have left, and I'll keep that in mind and try to put them into the investigations. But you can see the variety of, oh, we're not just learning about chicks, we're going to learn about like just eggs in general or other organisms. And they related it back to sound, which was so cool, or thermal energy in the cup that I did for Open Science, molecules, kinetic energy. It just, to see them weaving things together was so rewarding for me as a teacher to see that.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
neat.
one of the things we always say as a teacher, or especially in science, right, is like, I wish my kids would transfer what they know to the next piece. And especially shout out to Open Science, some of their units, because we've heard that from multiple teachers, and you have a great example here of kids using something they learned in a previous unit, applying it, in this case, to a life science, something they learned in physical science,
Yes.
Now they're using that in a life science context. And what better evidence do
Oh,
we
so
have
good.
that these are really, really important?
I mean, it
Um,
gets to the point where they were like, Mrs. Bolduc, is our molecules involved again? Is it
yes,
about kinetic energy again? Like they totally by the end of the year, by the end of seventh grade, they get that kinetic energy and molecules are pretty much involved in everything. And it's so cool to see them get that.
that's
And
awesome.
you're right, Open Science with this routine of related phenomena is a huge revolution, I think.
Yeah.
Here's our driving question board. So I took, and Tori's is coming up too.
Mhm.
I think is the next one, or it's coming up pretty soon. But I also had to kind of copy and paste. I took Tori's idea of check marking. So this is going to be the slide in my upcoming investigation where I'm showing kids, we had already done one. I'm showing them what we answered. In red is sort of the answer right there. So just trying to have a live DQB even virtually that, hey, like we figured these out. This is what we think. You can see on the bottom left that one circled in pink is the one that we're figuring out that day. So we're going to be looking inside of the egg, and I circled it because somebody had asked what develops first and why or how. So that's showing, hey, your questions are important and we are going to answer this one today. We're going to figure this out and look at the ones that we did figure out. So I also color coded them like Tori did, and I put them into the sections of questions mostly related to the beginning of the process, the middle, the end, and then related phenomena questions.
So this is a really amazing example of formative assessment. Like, and
Yes.
I think we have to point that out too. It's just when we engage students in their questions and we help them answer their questions and they're aware that they're answering their questions, like that's a great learning target,
Yeah, it's cool.
right?
And typically in the classroom, we'd have them answer, like put
Sure.
these red things on, but yeah, for this it worked well. But you're right, it shows that we are figuring things out and that we know the answers now
Yeah.
because of their questions. And then the last step for me was the investigation ideas. And you can see on the bottom left, I circled the investigation idea that the kids had that we're going to do today, just to show them, hey, like I like your ideas. They're great ideas. They're important ideas. Look, we're going to do it. We're going to do one of your ideas. And their ideas are very feasible because I had asked them, what could we do at home? So they know that we're at home. And a lot of kids started their thing with, I know we're at home, so maybe we should do this. I know we're at home, so maybe we should do that. And their ideas are most of them are pretty doable. Lots of plant connections here, I was so excited because Tori starts with plants in 8th grade, and lots of like, oh, this is like a plant growing. So it was pretty cool that they want to work with plants, which I thought was a neat thing to see, a pattern.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's what I got out of just that one Google form, just those 7 questions, and then you got these 3 Jamboards out of that, which was really cool. And if you wanted to, you could have the kids make these, but it is a lot of steps for them, maybe high school, maybe upper middle, but I'm just cautious about how many clicks and steps at this time of year for engagement. So as a teacher, you can decide. It's easier if the kids do it, but I wanted to make sure everybody's ideas were up there and I didn't want to miss anything.
Yeah.
And this is Tori's.
Sure.
I did very similarly. I had them answer some questions in a Google form. So I asked, what are some related phenomena? Gave them those sentence stems. This reminds me of. This might be like. Is this like blank? So I gave them some sentence stems to brainstorm related phenomena, and then just questions either we had along the way or questions at the end. I think I asked them, what are your top 3 questions at this point, just to kind of narrow it down. And it also makes them think about their important questions that are going to help us add something to our model. So then I took those out of the Google form and color coded them, and just found these bigger categories kind of come out. They had questions about the ancestor fox, questions about related phenomena, and then questions about how did they change, because that was the part we didn't understand. We kind of knew why, because they were in different climates or different environments, but didn't know how. And that's good because that's what our unit was about. So just kind of created this driving question board and then added some check boxes and some short answers as we started to answer them, just so that they could see, like, again, we're using your questions, we're answering your questions, and that they're important. also Nicole and I had been talking, and she brought up a great point of like another equity thing is sometimes in the classroom, certain students' questions are heard more because they're louder, or they're not as afraid to share. But this distance learning has actually given, I feel like, students who might be quieter or more hesitant to share a voice, which has been pretty cool. So I had some students email me like, oh, I saw my question on our driving question board, who maybe has never shared in the classroom. So I think I'm definitely going to take some of these tools and incorporate them in the classroom to make sure all voices are heard and make sure that all ideas are heard, rather than the ones that are just in the discussion circle, even though we obviously encourage every student to share in a discussion circle. But sometimes there are students who are more hesitant or more nervous. So I think that's been pretty cool too.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point. Yeah, and what a great observation, and something that we can, if there's a sort of a glass half full view of this, maybe we're learning some of those things now that we can apply in the
And
future.
I also had a student, like Tori said, the gallery walk for her was really nice. She said, I really felt more comfortable doing the gallery walk this way, sort of in a more private way. And I had never thought about that. And I didn't realize that she felt that way either. So that was an interesting insight for me too.
Very cool.
And then this was just our little related phenomena board. So I had students submit ideas for related phenomena, and I took pictures because I know for some of the students I try to like scaffold, and so I just did pictures instead, so that way they could easily see those connections that students were made. But either way is really awesome. I know Nicole had like so many related phenomena. For this one, I had the same ones over and over again, so I just took those. But this was really cool to kind of put together from what students submitted. And then these are just the details. So have students submit a question in a Google form. They could definitely put them right in the Jamboard. Again, I think we both didn't want to overwhelm our kids either with too many new things. Students can post questions on sticky notes, categorized by color, share them out the next day, and then revisit it, and check off questions as they go. And I know a question that I feel like a lot of teachers ask is, how much time does this take? So I actually kind of found it either takes the same amount of time or maybe even less, because the first day they model in their Google drawing, the second day they gallery walk and they add their sticky notes feedback, and then the third day they share out questions and related phenomena that they have. So really like 3 days. And I feel like it was because of distance learning, since you can't be as responsive as usual. I feel like I really valued those 3 days because I could be responsive, and it felt like science class and things like that. So it was pretty
And I
cool.
feel like piggybacking off of what Tori's saying, I feel like without these steps, I'm not sure kids would be as engaged, because I think they're going to want to see if their questions are up there. They're going to want to see if we answer them. Otherwise, we're, again, in the driver's seat, which we aren't in the classroom. We want the kids to take the lead with their questioning and student-drivenness and all that. And I feel like kids appreciate that, and we didn't want to lose that through distance learning. And it seems like out of a lot of the subjects, the kids are very engaged in science. We've been noticing that with our administrators, and we think a lot of it has to do with these routines, that they're still in the driver's seat in some ways, and we're still led by their curiosity. It's not like Tori and I are making all the decisions. We are using them as a bit of a guide too.
Well, I think you're bringing up a really important point, and shout out to the NGSX team and the Storylines team, because if you're building these lessons around phenomena, around modeling, around creating consensus explanations, that's a really big difference than, let's say, posting a video, assigning kids to watch somebody talk about a science topic, and then answering questions in a digital worksheet, right? You guys are engaging kids in a whole different level, but it starts with that phenomenon piece. And I think we were all fortunate to go through NGSX and kind of see some of those examples in the classroom setting. And now you guys are making amazing examples or adaptations in the remote world. So that's a really cool thing to see.
And you're right. And even though we're using videos and articles and things, they're in context. So I know, like yesterday, my kids, they wanted to know how long it takes for the chick to develop and how do you take care of eggs, because my coworker is hatching them at her house. Luckily, she's doing that. But the kids are sad it's not in the classroom, but at least, we named the eggs. I'm trying to get them as into it as possible. But they read about hens yesterday and they read about chicks and they watched like a video of like a hen. I used the open side videos and it made sense to do it then. It wasn't just like, we're going to learn about cells today because that's kind of where this unit goes, but it means something. They want to know the answer because they asked the question. So the videos and articles, some of the things that might be more traditional or that we would use less of, like we are using them, but in a meaningful way to answer their questions. And they're great resources for being at home because you can read an article and watch a video at home.
So do you think the driving question board, this just popped into my head, and so I'll pose it here, but I'm wondering if kids engaging with the driving question board is somewhat analogous to, them posting on Instagram or one of the other social media sites and then going back and looking for likes or looking for the comments from their friends. It's somewhat similar, right? That if their model gets picked and they're getting feedback from their kids, that gives them that reason to check in with folks, and it just happens to be science then instead of, I don't know, whatever kids post on Instagram. But
yeah, and some of them love that attention too, especially
sure.
if their names were on it.
Yeah.
Like, that was my question.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and that would be neat to think about leveraging that too. I would say like routine, like Tori was saying, consistency is what the kids are giving me feedback is something they really appreciate, and not to like throw too many different programs at them, not to make them click around too much. I think my kids have like really appreciated the organization and the thought that I'm putting into the lessons, but I'm keeping them simple to follow, and they're finding that they're learning a lot. So I think it's important to not overwhelm them, and that you're going to get more engagement using these routines, but then keeping things consistent and simple, but not simple content wise. I mean, you want to challenge them as much as you can, but simple in that it's not going to overwhelm them at home when they may not have help.
Yeah, I think the
not
routines thing is it's in the context that we're in right now, where all of our other routines have been pretty much thrown out the window. Engaging students in something comfortable that they're familiar with, even in an online form, is really a smart move.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's helped a lot.
And I was just going to say, keep it simple for teachers too. So if you can, use a Google form to go
Yes.
with something or something like that, it's definitely good for us.
Yes,
Yeah.
especially because a
Keep
lot
it
of us are
simple.
hardworking. And I had to like convince myself that, because the Google Forms, I use them sometimes in the classroom, but I do multiple choice now sometimes. And I think that's okay, because it is a great skill to be able to critically think. Tori and I were talking about this yesterday, but I've given myself permission to collect data through a Google form, and that's okay, because I have my own children that I've got to monitor throughout the day too. And I don't want to get so overwhelmed that I'm not giving them daily feedback. I want to give them daily feedback, but I have to make it manageable for me too with over 100 students.
Yeah.
So it's okay to find shortcuts, and I had to give myself permission to do that. That they're not going to do open responses on Google Docs every day. There's no way I could keep up with that, and that's okay.
That's absolutely okay. Yeah, 100%. Well, you guys, I just want to wrap up with a heartfelt thank you for your time. You've given us so much to think about and some really great examples to take back to our own context, and to keep figuring this out, because there's more to figure out. But you guys have given us a really great example, so I really appreciate it. And we'll see you on the Twitters.
Yes, thank you so much. This was so much fun to talk about.
Yes, thank you.